Hello everyone, it's Jean from the Inky Owl Studio. Thank you so much for joining me. I am going to be doing my next project, and it's going to be a grungy project. I have admired grungy artists for so long, and I've dabbled in it, so I'm going to dive just a little deeper into that. Today, what I'm going to be working on is collaging a lot of my vintage lace. Some of it I have tea stained or coffee stained. Collaging that onto the cover. So the cover is going to be made out of cloth and vintage lace. And so let's get started. This will be a process video, and I hope you enjoy it. I first began with a piece of muslin, and I tea stained it, and I let it dry, and I kind of got that light color. Then I went over it again with some distress ink that I watered down just a slightly inside of a bottle and sprayed these additional, and I believe I used vintage photo ink. And I just let it dry. And so my goal really was just to have a background that has some variance in the shades. Then I went through and I picked up laces out of my vintage stash, and I got a combination of light colored, medium colored, gray browns, warm browns, and just tried to get a variety that will add some dimension, because I am making this a monotone type of journal. These are a couple of a digital kit from Vintage by Me. I'm going to be using that throughout the journal. I also created a couple of my own pieces of ephemera here. So this is kind of the look that I'm going for and theme in this journal. So once I selected everything, then I just began to collage my piece, and I believe the foundation piece is 12.5 by 8.5 inches. And so here I really got fascinated with that medallion, and we'll come back to that later. A lot of my laces are just so ratty-tatty. I love them. Very vintage, and just using leftovers from previous projects. I laid this down so that a little bit of that lace kind of comes down off the bottom of the journal. This is one of those collars you would button around and wear over your dress or whatever, your blouse. And this was fascinating. I also had to make sure that I kept in mind the placement, where the spine was, where the back ended and the front ended. This is another very vintage piece. It's got some torn places, which I love, and actually I didn't tea stain this. This is naturally aged. I do like the way that the dark part of the base, where I made things darker, are kind of showing through on the laces in different degrees. And now I'm going to work on the spine area, trying to figure out how that might work. I'm auditioning different laces. Here's a couple of doilies. I love these doilies. And my thought was, isn't that just beautiful detail? Yeah, it's really hard to cut these up. I don't know if I can. My thought was maybe to lay that along the spine and let the parts come over, but just wasn't feeling it. So I'm coming back to this medallion, and I decided that it would make a wonderful centerpiece for the front. At one time I was going to put a piece of ephemera there, but I really like this idea of it all being of lace. I kind of felt that the collar, the lace collar, was distracting from the medallion there, so I removed that, and I plan to do some slow stitching on it as well. So now I have the spine to contend with. This is a piece of coffee stained lace, and I love the way it has a big coffee stain there at the top. And I think this is a much better option for the spine. It'll just peak a little bit on the front there, and now I just have to fill in that little area there. I really thought in the end that this lighter piece was the best because it kind of accented the lighter piece that's on the front, kind of brought that around to the back, so the back has a lot of that variety, just like the front did. Now we need a little bit more dimension there on the back. And I kind of, at first I thought these little medallions would be what I would put there. Now I'm going to just tack it down with some glue. You can use pins, but I really don't like working with pins all that much. I'm always stabbing myself. So I'm just putting a little bit of glitter glue just around different areas, just enough to get it tacked down so that when I handle it, it won't just all fall apart. I probably would not use Fabri-Tac for this just because it tends to show through and be shiny. Some kind of a wet glue, it doesn't have to be glitter glue, it could be, you know, whatever your favorite is. Just don't need a whole lot, just enough to secure it a bit. Yeah, which is the front, which is the back? That's kind of a mystery there, isn't it? I decided not to put the medallions down because I wasn't totally happy with those. So here's the finished, what I went with in the end. And this is a piece of batting that you would get like at the quilt store or at the fabric store, or even at Michael's, or not Michael's, Hobby Lobby. Just batting. And I'm tacking that down over it. Now I'm going to do some slow stitching. And I'm going to be using some neutral colors of pearl cotton mostly. I think I do use a little bit of embroidery floss. It doesn't matter. I like working with pearl cotton, and that's spelled P-E-R-L-E. And So I'm just going to start out with this looks a lot lighter than it is, but this is going to be a thread that pretty much blends in with the rest of the laces. And I'm going to just go around and start tacking down different points in different places of the lace. I don't do the whole piece here, or I did that off camera, but eventually what I did was I went around and used X's to tack down all over in different areas for the lace. Sometimes I used a contrasting darker color, and sometimes I used one that blended. It was just all very random. Here though, I want to make sure that my medallion is pretty well secured, so I'm just going to go around the outside edges, just going around the same place a couple times just to tack it down. Then we're just going to go through a few times. In the end, I began making knots. I didn't do it there, but we'll come to that later. Now I'm going to do a color, a gold color, something that will stand out. And I'm going to fill in around the curve of those petals. I think that was kind of accenting them a little bit. And I'll slow this down here in a minute to show you how I'm doing that. So I want to maintain that curve, and so therefore if you have just straight stitches by themselves, unless they're super tiny, they are going to be hard to make that curve. So I just come up, oops, I haven't finished this one yet. Thought I'd cut that out, guess I didn't. I'm going to come up here at the base of that curve. I'm going to make a stitch, you know, the deeper the curve, the smaller the stitch, but just, you know, like, I don't know, that's what, 1/4 of an inch or whatever. Then I'm going to come back halfway between the stitch where I went in and this where I came up out of, and the stitch where I went in. So I'm halfway between those 2 points. I'm pulling up on the thread so that that curve can start happening. And then I'm going to just tack that down by going in on the other side of that piece of thread. Now this is how I do things. I'm sure a professional embroiderer would approach this all different way, but I'm just sharing with you what I'm doing. So yeah, it's about a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch, something like that. And then coming back up between those 2 points, pulling up on the thread so that that curve starts to form, and then going down the opposite side of the thread just to secure that curve in there. I'm tacking down right at the point where the thread begins to curve. Now for you who do embroidery, this is a no-brainer and you might have a different way that you would have approached this, and that's perfectly fine. I did find that the deeper the curve, the smaller your stitch needed to be. Sometimes if you can't come up on the same stroke. I sometimes just go in, make that loop, and then come up. And so I finished the rest of it off camera. Now with that done, I'm using a dark brown thread, and I'm going to come in here and make some little French knots here in the center of the flower. And those are pretty simple and easy to make. Just come up, wrap around about 3 times, hold that thread taut, and then go back in where you came up from, and you have a knot. I've always worked in odd numbers whenever I do something. It was something I learned a long time ago, and I like the effect of it. So when I place things down, I try hard to make them odd numbers. So here I'm putting down 7 French knots. Although I don't think it's something you have to be concerned about. It's just something I always do. Now I want to put a couple of buds up here, and I'm just going to mark with a pencil, kind of get that centered a little bit according to the medallion. I did cut this material a little wee-jawed and short because I didn't know that I was going to do this. But anyway, so I'm going to make these flowers totally out of French knots. And in the center will be the dark thread. And what I like to do is make a knot on the back so that it doesn't, if it begins to pull up, it'll at least be stopped by this knot. I kind of messed that up. So I just take the loop, I go under into the loop, hold my needle into the loop down to the bottom and clip it off. And we'll do this again. But that way I feel like it won't pull out quite as quickly. And now we're going to put little French knots all the way around to be petals on the flower. We have the last one in, and there is our little flower. So cute. Now I need to put in a stem and leaves. I'm using embroidery floss for this, and I'm going to kick it down to 4 strands. Here I'm splitting it. And so now we're going to kind of make a curve, another curve like we did with the petals. And to do this, I come up and I try to catch where okay, there we go. You want to come up and make that arch up there. So when you go in, you kind of catch the tail of the last stitch. Come a little ways over. When I come back up, I go as high as I want that curve to be. Sometimes I want it high, sometimes I want it low. And then pull it through, gentle, doesn't have to be super tight. And then go back in and tack it down. So that is the stem. This is how I chose to do the stem. Now, there's different ways to do it, of course. And if it's too straight, you just go back in and now I'm going to be making leaves, and it's a lazy daisy stitch, and you just make a little loop. I guess I'm tacking it down. Make a little loop right there, and you come back up at, right at the tip of that loop, tack it down, and you have a leaf. You don't want to pull too hard to make these leaves. You pull slow and loose until it gets to be just the way you want it to be shaped. Here I pulled too hard, so now I gotta loosen it up a little bit. And then tack it down. Sorry that I wasn't closer on this. I guess I didn't realize how far away it was. Next time I'll have to readjust my camera. But yeah, you don't want to pull too hard, and just tack it down at the top of that loop. All right.
Well, the stitching is all finished, and I'll just show you how I stitched it up. I just made a lot of X's, and I tacked down with a, I just decided to use different colors of those neutral threads. And so I have X's through here. I have a French knot at each of these points, and of course I finished the flowers up a little bit, and also the main flower all around. I left this lace loose just because I thought it was kind of cute to have that. Put some dark brown across this way. Then I went in with a very light shade, I bought the shade of this lace thread, and I tacked down with a series of straight stitches and X's, like perhaps you can see a little bit showing, around here. I tacked down the lace, and then here on the back is also decorative stitches with darker thread, and I kind of went to these different points and put an X in, just decide how I want to do that. But then I did tack down the rest of it with a matching thread. I put a random series of X's in two different colors kind of around. You probably can see it better on that section right here, and just tacked it down. Now the edge of this lace is very frayed, as you can see. I mean, it's very thin, just thin threads, and that's what was on the edge here. And I tried to tack it down by hand, but it wasn't really doing so well. So went ahead and took lace and sewed in with my machine these different pieces of laces to kind of cover that a little bit. And I could have hand stitched it, but I think I was just wanting to be done. So all of this is vintage lace. I love the way it turned out. I didn't do any stitching in here because when I put the signatures in, that should really serve as anchoring for that lace there. Oops, let me put it up a little bit. So anyhow, that did that, and then when I was finished with that, I did leave tails on my knots, And then I went back in with a little bit of glue and put a little dot of glue on each of the knots, and I could see them better because of the tails. And hopefully that little bit of glue will, even more secure the stitches and threads and everything. So I did that part. I pinned this in to remind me not to sew it all up before I decide what I'm going to do for the closure. So kind of a reminder for me to remember to do that. I have prepared a backing out of a heavy cotton twill fabric, and I sprayed it a little bit. Now there's going to be more on here. I'll probably put pockets and stuff like that. So I just wanted a little bit of variance in the background. But eventually I will be sewing this on with my machine all the way around, and that should take care of all the leftover tacking that needs to be done. I was planning on putting in a piece of file folder to kind of be a liner, but I felt it was too thick and too heavy because this is a heavyweight file folder. So I'm going to probably use cardstock for that. And so when I get to that point, I'll make the decision then, but that's most likely what I'll be doing with that. So all that's left, well, all that's left, as if it's such a small thing, is to get all the papers ready and kind of work on them for a while. So that's most likely that's what I'll be doing next. I don't know. We'll have to see what I get in the mood to do. So next time, I hope to see you back again as we work on this Go Grunge cloth journal. And thank you so much for viewing, and you have a great rest of your day. Bye.